Well, thank you, everybody. Welcome to the final day of InformEx. It's been a great show, and all the brave people coming in the early morning here. Wonderful to listen to the three speakers that just were before me. You can't help but feel that we're in the right place as far as innovation is concerned. I was asked to come today and speak a little bit about innovation and green chemistry, and so I'm going to try to give people a little bit of a background and see how it fits in. I was glancing through the attendees at the conference, the people at the exhibitors, the speakers, and I think every organization that's involved in InformEx is really, at the end of the day, their biggest crisis, if you would call it that, is innovation. How do we get the next innovation to happen, and why isn't it happening as much as we would like? But at the same time, anyone in the chemical industry is also living a different world, and that other world is you open up the newspaper, you turn on the radio, you look on the internet, and you hear about this bad molecule that's hurting us, or this thing that's killing us, or this is toxic, or this is dangerous, or this is scary, this is making us ill, this is hurting us, this is scary, this is bad. It's like, who in their right mind would want to be a chemist today with all the press saying all these bad things that are happening? You know, it's like the game Whack-A-Mole. You hear about one bad molecule, and you hear about another bad molecule, and you hear about another bad molecule. What is the mascot of the American Chemical Society? It's a mole. We're playing whack-a-mole with chemistry. We hear about brominated flame retardants, whack. We hear about phthalates, whack. We hear about bisphenol A, whack. And we're breathless, and we're trying to think, okay, I almost understand this one, and then the next one comes, and then, okay, I understand, and then the other, and we're left with this. PhD chemists are left with this feeling, is this real or is this hype? And if PhD chemists don't know the answer, how do the people opening up the newspapers, looking in the internet, know? And it's an interesting conundrum. And so maybe we're not asking the right questions. Maybe instead of, is this toxic, is this hazardous, or how do we make this molecule or something like that, there's a more fundamental question. The more fundamental question is, why would a chemist make a hazardous material in the first place? If you were going to make a red dye, does a red dye have to be carcinogenic? No. Some dyes, because of their molecular structure, are carcinogenic. Does a plasticizer have to cause birth defects? No. A plasticizer, some of them do, because of an accident in their molecular structure. So there is no rule that says that hazard and the intended purpose of a molecule must be linked. So why would a chemist make a hazardous material? Maybe it's not about how we make molecules, but it's how we make chemists. Okay? And it's a really interesting thought. So I went and I worked at Polaroid. I thought I was going to be a medicinal chemist. I actually had academic appointments graduating from Princeton when this wonderful person, Lloyd Taylor, a senior corporate officer from Polaroid, invites me to lunch one day, and right there he asks me if I wanted to head exploratory research at Polaroid. I said, dude, I'm 24 years old, I'm going into academia. He told me how much he was going to pay me. I said, when do I start? And next thing you know, I find myself as an industrial chemist. Who would have ever thought that? And I had a blast. It was wonderful. I got to publish patents in holography and medical diagnostics and all different things, and it's just an interesting education. After 4 years of undergraduate and 3.5 years of graduate school, I feel that in the first 6 months at Polaroid, I learned more than my entire academic career. Now, if anyone is familiar with Polaroid, the instant photography company, this was a way of taking photographs that you could not make a phone call. It used to happen. And anyways, Polaroid, Edwin Land's one of my heroes, okay? And so Edwin Land won the Perkin Medal in 1974. And so to be working at Polaroid, the guy that, and now I don't have as much respect for the Perkin Medal because if they gave it to me, how good can it be? But to be able to be at the same place as Edwin Land as a synthetic organic chemist, it was the coolest place to be. But being introspective in a medicinal chemist, used to thinking about pharmaceuticals and medicinal chemistry, I asked myself an interesting question. I said, this is now back in the 80s. Chemistry had been around for about 180 years. And for 180 years of what we call modern chemistry, we do some pretty amazing things. The pharmaceuticals that are curing people, the ag agents that are feeding people, the textiles, the electronics, bless you. Everything that we do is really kind of cool. But if you think about how we manufacture everything, everything is at high temperature. Everything is at high pressure. We use all these weird reagents to carry out those synthetic transformations. Fair enough. Now, if you look out the window and you look out at nature, what do you see? You see trees, you see insects, you see bunnies, you see all these things out there in nature, and you look at it through the lens of the molecular level, and you see the molecular complexity and the molecular diversity is phenomenal. What we do as humans pales in comparison to the molecular diversity and structure that comes into natural phenomenon. But, wait a minute, not only is the structure that good, but everything in nature is manufactured at room temperature. It's manufactured at ambient pressure, and for the most part uses water as a solvent. So humans are using all these harsh reagents, doing little things, and nature's doing these amazing things at ambient temperature and pressure. This isn't a new thought. Other people thought this too. But I went the next step and I said, why? What is the magic that happens in nature? And then I had the epiphany. A thermometer is a molecular speedometer. What do I mean by that? When you learn chemistry, temperature is actually a measure of molecular velocity. Higher the temperature, the faster the molecules are moving. Now, what we learn in chemistry, and if you are blessed with a good chemistry instructor, what chemists learn is that molecules, when they undergo chemical reactions, there are these things called molecular orbitals. And most students, roll their eyes and scratch their head and spend hours talking about s orbitals and p orbitals and d orbitals, or the hybrid sigma orbitals, or pi orbitals, and not really a big connection to why. Well, the interesting thing is when you put two molecules together, they bang into each other, okay? And they continue to bang into each other, and usually nothing happens. And so if a chemical reaction is to happen, the trajectory must be perfect. Exactly 180 degrees for an SN2 reaction, exactly 120 degrees for an electrophilic aromatic substitution. So these orbitals impose strict molecular geometry. So we mere humans, when we do a reaction, we heat things up and put them under pressure just to increase the velocity so they bang into each other more often, so that every once in a while the right thing happens. Interestingly enough, in nature, there is never a reactive collision. If you think of all the synthetic, biosynthetic processes, everything that happens in nature is in a semi-solid gel state. Nothing is really in solution. And always the very same molecular orbitals that govern molecular reactivity govern some kind of self-assembly in which the molecules snuggle up next to each other first. And then once they're appropriately oriented, then they react. Oh, that's interesting. And so I started to think about that and say, how can I look at a manufacturing process? When a paint starts to peel, what's going on with molecular collisions? When we synthesize a material and we're getting a low yield, what's happening? When we're doing a coating run, what's happening? And try to see ways of imposing pre-selected order on the process of that kind of molecular transformation. And I called it non-covalent derivatization. Now, I won't kill you today on this. I could talk for hours and hours and hours. The license plate of my car is NCD. Okay, I really get into this stuff. All right, but I'm going to go easy and not go into it right now. But there, in the late 80s, a bunch of journals started, crystal engineering, and things like that. And now the pharmaceutical industry, there's a lot of companies here that work on the organic solid state and work on what are called co-crystals. Well, non-covalent derivatization came out in the 80s. About 5-6 years later, the pharmaceutical industry started to do these things. But interestingly enough, we were doing it at Polaroid. So some of these non-covalent derivatives at Polaroid, we had to get EPA approval. And I'm sure people in this room have had to do this. You go and get a low volume exemption or pre-manufacturing notification from the US EPA. Well, back in the 80s, these weren't computer-generated forms. You filled out banker's boxes, wrapped it up, and shipped it to the EPA. Well, I sent all the stuff for this one technology, and we waited, and ultimately the EPA rejected the technology, not because of toxicity, not because of environmental impact. They said, oh, small particles, are you crazy? Molecular complexes, are you high? They had no idea what I was talking about, so Polaroid stuck me on an airplane and sent me to the EPA to meet the branch chief of the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics. First time in my life I'd been on an airplane. I'm holding a briefcase of overhead transparencies. I'm a little intimidated, scared, a little bit mad. And I go meet Paul Anastas, the branch chief of the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics. Now I say I meet it. I've known this guy since I was 11 years old. I went to undergraduate with him. In fact, I was playing in a jazz band with his older brother. There's his older brother with a saxophone. There's me on the keyboard. My older brother with awesome hair. And this guy here playing guitar, if you've ever been to Vegas, all the billboards that are legends of rock, the dude who plays Rod Stewart is my guitar player there. Has nothing to do with this talk. It's just kind of cool. So anyways, I can say to Paul, dude, for the last 10 years, we've been making this material with all these synthetic steps, with all these transformations. We now have this one-step aqueous process that's non-toxic, and the EPA is going to make it difficult because it's different? Isn't, by definition, anything better for the environment, anything less toxic, going to be different? And if the EPA is orthogonal to anything being different, isn't this a problem? Shouldn't you instead be promoting technologies that are less toxic? Shouldn't you be promoting things that have less environmental impact? Shouldn't you be promoting things that have less energy? Shouldn't you be promoting things that are biodegradable? Shouldn't you? And I got tired of all this list of what, and it was, well, what is it? What is it that the EPA should be promoting? And so Paul at the EPA and I, that is the birth of the field of green chemistry. That is the it that should be promoted. Instead of saying what not to do, what should we do? And it was really another interesting epiphany, because essentially what it's saying is that companies want to make the right products, right? There's no doubt about it. They're trying to do that. But when it comes to the environment, there's not a lot of voice of customer. So how does that all fit together? So the definition of green chemistry is, yes, it has some environmental benefit, but that's never in the front. Green chemistry, for it to be successful, has to have superior performance, has to have superior cost. And oh, by the way, if you're looking for an environmental narrative, here it is. But if you're going to market with something that's inferior performance, inferior cost, and you're asking the government to either regulate or subsidize so it gets adopted, the chemist isn't doing their job. Get back in the lab and make a better product. So green chemistry is going better than normal chemistry, if you will, by addressing those issues. Because it's an interesting thing. What I found at Polaroid, we hired probably 40 or 50 students just like me, fresh out of graduate school, and they would invent something that could not be manufactured. So we would have to invent it a second time using the real world of what solvents, what reagents and things could be used. So that's really not efficient. If they understood regulations, if they understood things, maybe they would be faster. And so, Paul and I were hanging around, and one day he said, let's write a book. I must have been drinking at the time. I said, yes. Had I thought anyone was ever going to read this book, we would have written a better book. But I feel like Forrest Gump. Soon as the book gets translated into 15 different languages, I've been to over 40 countries meeting presidents and prime ministers, and any chemist could have written this book. It really is just a simple acknowledgement that when we invent something, the best time to worry about toxicity, the best time to worry about environmental impact is when we first put that pen to paper and start thinking about it, not after we've synthesized it, before. And that's really as simple as that. And so all the cost savings, all the moral and ethical components to it are locked into the very concept, we should do it first. And so the 12 principles in that book is kind of interesting. It's a way of saying to a chemist who wants to manufacture a product, what are the things they should be thinking about? Right? And now here's the big thing. So I'm starting green chemistry, and I'm doing it from this intellectual, very efficient thing. When the next step, I started to realize, in the United States alone, we graduate 15,000 undergraduates in chemistry every year. 3,000 masters, 3,000 PhDs. In 2004, more women became chemists than men. If you Google every chemistry department in the country and you look at the classes that you must take to get a degree in chemistry, you will find no university requires a student to ever have a class in mechanistic toxicology, ever have a class in environmental mechanisms, ever have a class in law and policy. And so the only people in the world who have the skill of how to assemble a molecule to put atoms in unique geometries that have never existed before have no idea if what they're about to make may be the most potent neurotoxin in history, the most potent carcinogen. Why do we have red dyes that cause cancer? Why do we have plasticizers that cause birth defects? If the people making the molecules have no clue how to even learn what those mechanisms are, how could they not? Now, one could say, oh, that's terrible, that's horrible. I refuse to go down that road. I say, this is a path to solving a problem. Have the students take classes in toxicology and environmental mechanisms. So I left Polaroid after 10 years, and I went to the UMass system. I was chair of chemistry in Boston, director of biochemistry in a multi-campus and full professor of plastics engineering in Lowell, and we started the world's first PhD program in green chemistry. Everything that is in a quote-unquote normal program, but added classes in toxicology and environmental mechanisms and law and policy. Over the next 10 years, there was about 100 students at different levels passed through the program. Typically, the average time it took one of those students to get a job in industry is 2 days. The longest any student spent on the job market was about 2 weeks because they turned down the first couple job offers. 10 years later, I still have companies calling me saying, John, you got any students? I go, well, I left academia a while ago. And so it's a really interesting thing to be able to invent, but also be able to navigate what's going on in the environmental regulatory world. Because of all the products and processes we have out there, I would argue really only about 10% escape somebody's scrutiny. The ceiling tiles, the carpeting, the fabrics, everything else. There's some group shaking their fists. Sometimes it's legitimate, sometimes it's hype, but about 90% of the stuff, somebody's got some issues with sustainability. If you do what's called an alternatives assessment, looking in the supply chain for something that will improve that performance, I feel you will find it 25% of the time. But right now, in 2016, I would argue 65% of the technologies haven't been invented yet. This isn't a crisis of morals. It's not this epic battle of good and evil that industry is pushing toxic materials for profits. This is a crisis of innovation, that we don't have the skill set. Of course, think of it. If you have a technology that performs better than an incumbent technology, has a better cost structure than an incumbent technology, and oh, by the way, is less toxic, what barrier to adoption could there possibly be except for its invention in the first place? But, so there are companies that have billion-dollar R&D budgets. Those very same companies have billion-dollar environmental compliance budgets. It's a no-brainer. Okay, from now on, let's just invent environmentally, but none of those chemists have had classes in toxicology, have had any training in environmental mechanisms. So the desire is there, the ability is not. Okay? The toolbox, the way I like to look at it is we have a toolbox in the chemical enterprises. We have all these drawers. We've got, carbon-carbon forming reactions. We've got oxidations, reductions. If we can design something and it doesn't violate some fundamental rule of law or something, we could probably make it. But if you imagine a green chemistry toolbox with all those transformations lined up, it's pretty empty. I believe an individual, I believe a company, I believe a developing nation will open the green chemistry toolbox. But odds are it's going to be empty. And the way our economy, the way things work now, they can't say, stop everything, let's invent a new alternative that's less toxic. What they have to do is they have to call the lawyers, they have to call the regulatory people, say, okay, what gloves, what masks, what goggles, what scrubbers, what filters, what policies do we have to take out, because we're going to have to use this traditional technology.
That's just, we're moving too fast to do that. So we need to see innovation happening at the universities and the small startup companies to do that. And that's why just 2 weeks ago, I went to Washington and you had a bunch of congressional briefings in the Senate and in the House to talk about TSCA reform. That if TSCA reform is done correctly, it is going to catalyze innovation. If TSCA reform is done incorrectly, it could stifle innovation. This here is an amazing opportunity for industry to increase market share, increase profitability by focusing on what the rest of society is actually asking for, but because of some weird aberration, we're not trained to deal with it. It doesn't mean we should stick our head in the sand and hope it goes away. We should embrace it and make this part of our future. Sustainability is about growing business, not fighting regulations. This group, Pike Research, did an evaluation. They feel that by 2020, it's going to be a $100 billion global enterprise, green chemistry. I think it's far ahead already. All right, and so this is not, yes, there is a huge moral and ethical component to this, but there's also a very smart business component to this too. So in 2004, I get called the country's #1 science professor. I spent a half an hour in the Oval Office with President Bush. I don't know which one of us looks more stunned in that picture. And so I celebrate by leaving academia. I spent 10, 11 years, and I left. And the reason I left was for this strange reason. Our society pays more attention to identifying and describing problems than solving them. Around that time, I had probably about 250 publications working on different technologies, making them a little less toxic, using a little less energy, making it a little more biodegradable, doing something. All right? No one knew anything that I was doing. But one day, you know the story of bisphenol A and Nalgene. Canada banned Nalgene plastic bottles. Now, every science writer has in their restroom, if you sound depressed, call John Warner, he'll give you a nice quote. So I'm always inundated. Hey, John, give us a quote, give us a quote. And so Canada banned Nalgene. I'm driving in my car, my cell phone rings, and someone says, what do you think about Nalgene? And so I pull over into a parking lot, into a grocery store parking lot. And I'm talking on the phone, and a pregnant woman comes out, fumbling with her bags and her keys, and she takes her cash register receipt, and she puts it in her mouth, and it just a neuron popped in my head. I go, Nalgene bottles? What the heck? Do you know what bisphenol A is in milligram quantities, free, not polymerized, but free in thermal cash register receipts. The human exposure to bisphenol A, if you hold onto a cash register receipt for 1 minute, you'll have more transdermal exposure than a lifetime of drinking Nalgene bottles. Why are we chasing Nalgene bottles? I just was on a rant. Okay, and they hung up. But what they did was they wrote it. Next thing you know, hundreds of websites. John Warner reveals bisphenol A in cash register receipts. I revealed nothing. It's in the patent, okay? I didn't think, and next thing you know, I'm on Tom Ashbrook and talking and being and I'm saying, man, a lifetime of trying to solve problems, no one cares. The moment I identify a problem, I become famous. That's just weird. And I really felt I had to do something to leave that. And the way I wanted to do it was to focus exclusively on inventing. Just look at innovation. I was even on the same page as a cat pushing a shopping carriage. John Warner, something went wrong in my life, all right? And so I was the luckiest to meet Jim Babcock, this amazing individual who just shared my vision. And I said, what I want to do, I just want to get every piece of research equipment I've ever touched in my life, put it under one roof, hire about 30 of the most brilliant PhD scientists that I can, don't publish any papers, don't speak at technical conference, just invent. Don't write grants, be strictly business to business. And bless his heart, we set up the Warner Babcock Institute for Green Chemistry. It's a 42,000 square foot facility with everything you need to make small molecules, polymers, to do extrusions and moldings and composites. And then we measure it and we analyze it, everything that you can imagine there. And we've just had a blast. Okay, and so we have two business models. One business model, about 80% of our business, we work with other companies. Big companies, small companies, startup companies, brands, chemical, suppliers, everything in the supply chain. What they do is they say, hey man, we've been trying for like 20 years to solve this problem, and we need a new way of looking at it. And so what we do is we charge our cost. We're very, very fast because we're not publishing, we're not doing anything. In between 6 and 9 months, we go from an idea in our head to a pilot scale test where we innovate and create an invention for the client and help them commercialize it. And that's been a very successful program. And for 8, 9 years now, we went cash positive in 2 years. And we started in 2007 in history's worst economy, a chemical company, making it because it's all about innovation. Now, rarely is it about green. We don't green people up. But what we do is we provide something with superior performance and superior cost. And if there is a desire for the green narrative, because we're passionate about it, we'll only do that. It's there, but it's not in the front. It's in the back. Now, about 4 years ago, Jim Babcock said, well, wait a minute, why don't we just start doing things ourselves? And so we started to do our own self-funded research. And in 4 years, we've actually created a ton of companies. We have 2 umbrella parent companies. There's the Warner Babcock Institute. We have a material science company called Collaborative Aggregates. We have a pharmaceutical company called Collaborative Medicinal Development. And then there are daughter companies under those things there. So for example, we have an ALS Parkinson's drug in clinical trials in Australia. Okay? This molecule called copper ATSM is a virtually insoluble molecule. It goes into laboratory animals with DMSO and surfactants that you really can't use in humans. But using that thing called non-covalent derivatization, we created a new composition of matter that actually does incredibly well for oral bioavailability. And it also, for a couple reasons I won't go into, increases the efficacy of it. And so Michael J. Fox caught notice of it, supported some of the early preclinical, and like I said, in the University of Melbourne, we're now in humans testing this. We have an Alzheimer's drug. The name of Jim Babcock's investment company is called Cthulhu Ventures, the science fiction creature from 1906 Lovecraft novels. And so I named the molecule Cthulhu. It worked for me. So anyways, over the next 2 years, from 2012 to 2013, we made a series of derivatives, increased the oral bioavailability of this thing in the effective dose so that the EC50 is in nanogram quantities. And so we're really excited about that product, that one there. We have an oncology product that is also in clinical trials in Australia. So we have 2 clinical trials, the oncology project and the ALS drug. Now at the same time, in the same lab, standing next to these people, or these very same people, we're working in asphalt. The United States has 1 billion miles of pavement. Every year, 10% has to be repaved. Now, the reason it has to be repaved is because the sunlight in the air oxidize it and make it brittle. And so we dig it up and we put it in a landfill. You can't reuse it because it's too brittle. Maybe you can use 5, 10%, but not a lot. So I said, what if I came up with a molecule that would allow you to use all of the recycled material? Imagine a street Zamboni going down and digging up and then just leaving new street. Instead of landfills and bringing in virgin material, the cost savings, because you have ridiculously small materials, but also there'd be energy savings and everything else. And so we came up with this molecule, and me being a silly, bold person, the first thing I did is dug up my own driveway. My family was pretty upset because it was a perfectly good driveway, but I said, we got to test it somewhere. And so I have people from the Massachusetts Department of Transportation there with clipboards. I've never done this before, and here we are, we're going to do a field testament. The workers come in with these 2 dump trucks full of asphalt. They're laughing at me. John, it's 17 degrees Fahrenheit. We have never paved this cold. We've got over 70% recycled content. We have never done over 15%. You can't do this. We're going to open up the dump truck. Massive hockey pucks are going to fall out. We're driving away and leaving you. Well, okay. And so I said, go ahead. They open it up. Powdered asphalt comes out. They scream like school children, jump on their bulldozers, and I have this beautiful driveway. This is just 2 days ago in my house. 2 years later, it works, and it works really, really well. And so now what we did is we started a company called Collaborative. Me being the thermodynamics nerd, I named the product Delta S. Wait for it. Okay, Anyways, it's being spec'd as a test track down in Atlanta, Georgia, that it's a year-long. Big trucks just drive around it for a whole year. And if it passes that, 37 states will accept it as specified for their roads. This is pretty exciting. Now, you might think that that's weird. All right, imagine this picture. Here I am standing with a hard hat and boots, holding a shovel, digging in asphalt. My cell phone rings up, and there's these people from Finland talking about my Alzheimer's results and the cognition studies of these laboratory mice. Now, you might think that's a little bit of a strange picture. It's not. The mechanism of Alzheimer's that I'm going at is these organic protein polymers wrap around an inorganic particle. My small molecule comes in and works at the interface of the organic polymer and the small particle. Asphalt is an organic polymer around an inorganic particle. My small molecule, it's the same thing. We in science, we put ourselves in these little buckets. I'm a pharmaceutical scientist, I'm a cosmetic scientist, I'm a this, I'm a that. At the end of the day, we're chemists. Jerry Garcia has this great quote. He said, people make a mistake. They say, be the best that you can be. And that's not really it. It's find out what you're uniquely capable of doing and do that extraordinarily. Chemists are good at doing chemistry. A molecule doesn't know if it's in a neuro product or an asphalt. It's just a molecule. If we think about molecules at the molecular level, there's no field we can't work in. And it's an illusion to think that someone trained in one field has to do, people in pharmaceutical industry, all they do is they go to conferences at pharmaceutical industry, and they go and you can almost see them lip syncing what the speaker is saying. Why are you wasting your time? Go to a construction conference. Learn how science is being done in other places, not in the place you go every day. We have a formaldehyde-free wood composite. We came up with a thing. Formaldehyde's a big problem, especially down here. The Hurricane Katrina, all the FEMA trailers and the formaldehyde off-gassing. 60 Minutes had a big thing about lumber liquidators. They've gone to a replacement technology called MDI, and a small percent of the industry has gone to that for wood construction. I predict in about 12 months, the environmental activist groups are going to identify MDI as the next BPA. It's not going to stay. And so we need something else. So we went in the lab, we came up with a new technology. We went up to Alberta, Canada. We've done 2 70-ton pilot manufacturing runs of OSB lumber that outperforms industry standard, better at cost than industry standard, without a drop of formaldehyde, without a drop of MDI. We're pretty excited about this one. This is going to be a strange story. I can't explain why I do some of these things. One day I was contemplating insect sclerotization. Insect sclerotization is the process in which a bug's exoskeleton can't grow. And so as it tries to grow, the exoskeleton breaks off, it gets bigger, and then it turns color over the next hour. Okay? I said, that's interesting. A colorless to colored transition in nature. Now, if anyone is into hair coloring technologies, a men's product, you may recognize this box. You know what the only active ingredient in this men's hair coloring product is? Lead tetraacetate. Okay? You can't sell a house in the United States with lead paint, but you can go to CVS and pour it on your head. Absolutely insane. All right, and so women's hair coloring technology is all pretty dangerous and toxic. And I said, wait a minute, if this does something in nature, what happens with hair? So I call a vendor and I get some gray hair, and I go, okay, this is a tyrosinase cascade. I figure out the mechanism, what's going on here, stick it in a beaker, get some gray hair, swirl it around, it turned brown. Ooh, that's pretty cool. But then when I looked close, I said, oh man, but it's dark brown, it's light brown, it's all these different shades of brown. Who's going to want all these different colors? I called the vendor and they said, no, John, that's not one person. We sent you a bunch of different people's hair. So next thing I go, okay, I'm the most gray person here. Hit me. And it went back to the color my hair was in graduate school. I got someone with black hair. It went black. Someone with light brown hair, it's not a hair coloring technology. It restores the human pigment, whatever color your hair. So what I discovered is that your hair templates the solid state aggregation of the oligomerized melanin packets, and it dictates the color hair. It's not the molecules, but it's the non-covalent derivatization within the protein. So by coming up with a gentle process that penetrates the hair, the natural templating still is there to take off. And I'd say, the asphalt, we went from an idea in my head to 55-gallon drums being sold in 14 months. In about 18, 20 months, we went from this to licensing it to a company called Hairprint. It's now on sale on the market. We've already gotten a few royalty checks, and it's already out there. It's a pretty interesting product. We have hair shaping. We've used DNA photodimerization to make synthetic polymers that allow you to curl your hair or to put template pleats and fibers and things. Here's a crazy story. On June 29th, I found myself sitting on the center stage of the UN General Assembly. And there I am, my big image there. And what would I do in there? Do you know the show Whale Wars? It's a cable show where the people go and chase evil, bad fishers, and they drive them, and they do heroic things to save the oceans and whatnot. Well, they had an episode where they found the 75 tons of gill net. So they saved the oceans and brought the gill net up, and they sent it to me, and they gave me 7 days. And in 7 days, they needed me to take this and separate the nylon from the polypropylene, develop a way to pull the lead weighting out, pull out the pigments, grind it, extrude it, clean it, and make fibers of it. And get this, send it to Adidas, and standing next to me, chairman of the board of Adidas, holding up the 2016 model running shoe made from ocean plastics. Kind of fun. We have electronics recycling, where we took, again, I can't explain why these ideas come up, but we took limonene from orange oil, hydrolyze it 50% to make a 50-50 mixture of limonene and limonol. If I then make a dispersion in water, if I grind up a lithium cobalt battery, float it in that mixture, it's the perfect density that the lithium cobalt floats to the surface, separates out, and you get 100% recovery of the lithium cobalt from the battery. We've got pilot plants in China doing this now. We have water harvesting technologies, molecules that when the light is off, it doesn't absorb water. When the light is on, it absorbs water. So this is a really oversimplification, but imagine on the ocean a rowboat. You've got an umbrella on the rowboat. When the sun comes out, the water sticks to the underside of the umbrella. When the sun goes down, it rains pure water in the boat. No, that's not really what we're doing, but it gives you an idea. And so we've developed things that work slow, and then we have millisecond response that work in the shadow of a windmill. So as the light goes and flickers, we harvest, release, harvest, release, harvest, release. We've got flavor-enhancing technologies. We've got solar energy devices. We've got, of course, bisphenol-free thermal imaging papers. So we've been just having a blast. So I wanted to close and just give a little bit of thought about innovation. About 3 years ago, I was put on stage by Fortune magazine beside Andrew Laveris, the CEO of Dow. And we bantered back and forth about the future of the chemical industries. After we talked, the first question from the audience is someone says, "John, can big companies still innovate?" I'm standing next to the guy. What am I going to say? And so I said, "Yes." And I said, "Man, think quick, think quick, think quick." And I said, the bigger the company, the more innovation happens. 5 people will innovate 5 times faster than 1, 10. It's a scale of linear thing. However, in organizations, the negation effect, saying let's stop, let's not do it, is nonlinear. So if an organization doesn't keep in control the dream robbers, the naysayers, the people that don't ever work, you can't innovate. So it's not that big companies can't innovate. They innovate all the time. They just end up throwing that innovation away. And that you really have to do. And so then that is control the negative dream robbers. Right? And so as I was flying home from that conference, I started thinking about it, and I got more introspective, and I came up with what I call my 5 elements of innovation. And I'm not so presumptuous to believe that I've got all the answers to something like this, but so I humbly just share them with you. If it works for you, good. If it doesn't, fine. But this is what I said. All innovation starts with science fiction. All right? If you imagine a technology that doesn't exist by today's state of science, by definition, that is science fiction. And if we don't think, when we're training scientists, when we're sitting in the lab, if we don't think of ourselves as science fiction authors, we can't invent. It's as simple as that. Now, I am a huge science fiction fan, and the greatest moment of my life, one of them, was in 2011 when I got to give the keynote talk at the International Science Fiction Writers Meeting, where they give the Hugo Awards and the Nebula Awards. Really kind of funny. I can be at a conference, meet a Nobel laureate in chemistry, go, hey, dude, but I see my favorite author, and so I'm sitting there and I give this talk to them about innovation and stuff like that. It is a very strange thing to give a talk to 1,000 Wookiees and Ewoks and people with lightsabers. A very interesting experiment, but it's really true. When we think about science and innovation, we're science fiction writers. So when I drive to work every day, I write science fiction. And on a good day, when I drive home, I've converted some of it to fact. That's just the way it works. The second one is innovation doesn't happen within the field of focus, but in the periphery. How much times do we hear focus, focus, focus? It's kind of missing the point that all discoveries, the vast majority of them, have happened because very aware, very clever people saw something unexpected in their peripheral vision. That's the way it really works. And we're becoming so wedded to focus, the plan, that we've even automated and have high throughput mechanisms to make sure we never look in the periphery. It's not saying that high throughput doesn't have its place, but it's a cautionary tale that you can rob yourself of innovation if you go overboard with it. It's the periphery that we need to be in. Encyclopedic knowledge inhibits innovation in the absence of intuitive knowledge. This is kind of controversial, but I feel very strongly about this. All right? We in academia, we love encyclopedic knowledge. It's really easy to grade encyclopedic knowledge. Okay, answer these questions. A, B, C. Okay, B, correct. A, incorrect. So encyclopedic knowledge is the easy thing to grade, and so that's what we teach. How do you evaluate and grade intuition? We can't. And so when an intuitive person comes up with a great idea, people will support it. But think about it. The person that's going to cite precedent, well, back in 1997, Binky did this, they're not saying, so let's do it. They're saying, so we shouldn't do it. I need to. So encyclopedic knowledge is often used to suppress innovation. It's important. I'm not saying it's not important, but wise management has to keep a balance. The intuitives have to be protected from overbearance of encyclopedic knowledge. I use as an example is if we had a bunch of runners, we said, these 20 people in 2 years are going to run a marathon. Right? Now, if they've never trained for a marathon, you have no idea how they're going to train. Okay? And so an unwise individual would say, okay, we'll have them run a marathon today so we know who's going to win in 2 years. Now, of course, anyone who knows this knows that that's ridiculous. The person who has the eyes that you know that they're going to be intent, they may be 100 pounds overweight, but in 2 years they're going to win. And someone who looks really, really fit and everything, they might not have the willpower and the endurance, and they're not going to. So what people look like at the beginning has nothing to do with it. And when R&D, when we start innovating, the hoops we have to jump through at the beginning are often not the hoops that you do in the market. In an unwise organization, encyclopedically, forces criteria in the market too early in the innovation stage, and in so doing, robs that organization of a chance of succeeding. A good coach doesn't need the person to run the marathon to know if they're going to run a marathon. They have other ways. A good science organization doesn't need to test a detergent as a detergent to know if the technology will one day be a good detergent. Unwise management doesn't get that. Another one is the inability to innovate is simultaneously proportional to wisdom and the tolerance of risk. Everyone knows the story. Daniel Schleckman got the Nobel Prize. Initially, he gets rejected from his university. The Science Society kicks him out. Everyone laughs at him. He's an idiot, oh boy. And then he comes back and he gets the Nobel Prize. And the story, wow, through perseverance, through will. That seems like a nice story. I don't like the story. I see this as a condemnation of the field of science. That it isn't the invention that was important, it was his personality, his perseverance. When you're sitting at the table, it's not the loudest person who might have the best answer. And if we're rewarding people just because of their passion and because of their ability to communicate a message, that's just not the way science works. We have to realize that when an organization does a skills assessment, oftentimes what they do, you're really good at this, you're weak at this, let's send you to a workshop to get better at what you're weak at. The worst thing you can ever do. A good management has a collaboration and puts people who are good at things together so that if someone isn't good at something, there's something inherent in them that they're not good at it. Have them do what they're good at and do even more of that. Don't rob them of what they're good of and have them compensate. So organizations need to figure that out. And the last one is innovation is orthogonal to complexity. Yes, in manufacturing, you need to have simple solutions, and simple solutions have their own elegance. But the way the human mind works is we love to construct Rube Goldberg devices first. And then we say, okay, we can do this, we'll do this and do this. And then the mind has a way of funneling it down and simplifying it. If you insist that it's simple at the outset, you can't do it. And so it's not that we don't need it to be simple, but it's not related to innovation. It's a different process. So I say it's orthogonal. So I hope that this talk gives you a little bit of a view of different ways of thinking. Again, I'm not so presumptuous to say that you must agree with me or that what I have to say has any real value. I just, like I said, in all humility, just want to share the way the world looks to me. And if it helps you, I hope it's been good. Thank you.
So we have a few minutes for questions for John, if anyone has them. We have a mic here. Colleen can get it to you. Anybody?
As I hang around universities, I've seen a trend in chemistry and material science. And that's the movement from what I call research to doing data collection and then spinning that data to make it seem like it has some meaning in the world. You can generate lots of publications that way. Do you see that?
I could go on and on and on about these kinds of issues. I think that there's hope. Obviously, we do a damn good job in academia training scientists. It's something that we do a really good job at. But just because we do a real good job doesn't mean it couldn't be done better. I do feel that the skill sets required to publish a paper have evolved to such a point now that it's almost unrelated to solving a problem in industry. And the things you need to do, the hoops you need to jump through to publish a paper, don't train a scientist to invent. So if you are doing something to anticipate what a peer review person might say, you're focusing on the wrong thing. You should be focusing on your chemistry and doing the best chemistry, not doing what some peer reviewer might like. And if you're working towards the wrong goals, and it's not the wrong goals, we have unfortunately evolved to a world where publication count is the only currency in grant money, instead of how many solutions have we solved. 85% of our students ultimately get jobs in industry. Okay, we're not doing a good job. Now here we've seen programs that are illustrated here in Alabama that get it. And so I am super optimistic that the needle is pushing. It's gone too far in one way. It will come back, all right? And so I'm super hopeful. But there are some universities that still don't quite get it. But the students do. And that's all that really matters.
Hi, my name is Mark Seban. I'm at the Xerox Research Center of Canada. And we partnered with Green Center Canada 2 years ago. And just last year, we started and finished 10 projects with them. What really impresses me about your presentation is not just the number of ideas that you come up with, but also the number of products that you turn these ideas into. And we all know that probably less than 10% of all the patents out there are actually making money. And some people argue it's actually less than 1%. So I think it's not the number of patents, it's the quality. Absolutely. And the ability to actually turn these patents into products. You seem to somehow bridge that gap quite quickly and easily. Can you tell us a little bit, who do you partner with, who helps you in your process from innovation commercialization? And if you'd have an idea for 2 phone apps, I'd love to discuss them with you. It's all on green chemistry, booth 1209. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just give a really quick thing, is that everyone has incubators. They take a prototype and they try to commercialize it. And there are thousands of incubators. And they have a very low success rate, less than 10% of a success rate. I believe strongly that it's not because of the skills of the people trying to commercialize it, it's because sadly they're not very good prototypes. That the mechanism of investment is you have to represent something as being almost done to get the money. It's almost a little white lie. So once you've got that money and you're pushing it forward, you can't say there's a fatal flaw, we got to go back and reinvent it. And usually it has some environmental consequence or some other business consequence. Science is great, there's tons of publications, but there's some business stuff that's been left out. I don't consider WBI an incubator. All of the inventions start with me, and we don't take in, we do the inventions ourselves. I call ourselves a technology greenhouse. And we focus on idea to prototype. It's a lot less expensive, and at the first moment the scientist starts doing something, the business case is being evaluated. If an employee at the Babcock Institute wanted to get 5 milligrams of unobtainium to test some theory, I would fire them. Anything we buy must be available on the commercial market today at appropriate cost. We're not publishing papers, we're solving problems. And so you restrict yourself in a way to the starting materials and you allow innovation to run it. And so if you're not looking to publish a paper, it's not the fancy reagents you need, it's the commonplace ones. And so we really, and the other thing is, we never invent for the sake of inventing. Here I am at InformEx, I'm gonna get 6 phone calls at the end of this saying, oh gee, we wish we had this, we had this. I'm always getting, so anything we do, we already know 6 people that we can call once we invent it. We don't invent something and then scratch our heads and wonder if the world wants it. We're not gonna waste our time doing that. And so it is a very strange way we do it, but we're passionate. And the people, again, I'm blessed with the most brilliant, beautiful people working for me, and it makes it easy. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. Are there any formal innovation or design methodologies that you recommend that we teach in our classroom, like TRIZ or design thinking, things like that?
One simple thing, and it's crazy, but whenever we start a project, I forbid people to go to the library. I say, get in the lab, develop your own intuitive, mechanistic interpretation of what's going on. Fill your head first with what you think you believe. Have the self-confidence to believe that you are capable of understanding this. You don't need to read what other people think are happening. Create it yourself. Then read the literature. And then, instead of reading the literature first and putting all this bias and robbing yourself of innovation, first have the courage to go in the lab and do it yourself. And what always happens is some things, when we do the second phase, which I call integration, we will discover some commonalities. But because we went in the lab first, we always come up with an approach that no one's ever thought of. But if you read everybody's approach, and so what I do is I'll take people and always put them in a field they have never done anything before. If you get a brilliant person that's good at solving problems, when they first go in the lab, they're gonna do amazing things. After they've read a certain number of papers and textbooks and journals and patents, it kind of vanishes and goes away and they become like everybody else. So the trick is, what you did in graduate school, if you're lucky, you will never do again in your life. If you spend your whole life doing the same thing, what a sad existence. Yeah.
Hi, John. My name is Rich Amatrano, and I have a question. Is your focus at the Institute then primarily for meeting needs that already exist and not very much focus on basic research? And what do you think the role of basic research is? Because it seems like
Okay.
that's disappearing from the industrial world.
Two things. As chair of a chemistry department, we had this very violent debate about science for the sake of science and applied science. And I got to tell you, I am physiologically incapable of having that conversation. Any predictable way of changing matter has an application. It's about the creativity and the ingenuity of the individual looking at that transformation. To say that this transformation or this piece of knowledge is not applied and this is, I don't get that at all. Everything is applied. Everything is basic. Those words have no real meaning. So all you're saying is, I want a job in which I don't have to think about the application. Well, I don't even know how you could possibly do that. As you're doing something, you must be asking yourself, why am I doing this? And so there always has to be an application. I think that weird conversation, and so we are the most basic of chemistry, all right? We are doing things that you could publish tons of papers and issue tons of press releases, doing things in molecular ways that no one's ever done before. So it is the most cutting edge basic research, but it's for a purpose that we intend to have commercialized within 1 year. So it's very applied. I'm not going to solve a problem the way everybody else is. Any solution is going to be new and different and could be really, really cool to publish in journals if that was our goal. But I want to do the really cool things that we could publish in journals, but allow the product to be the dissemination of that knowledge, not the journal article.
I like very much your ideas on green chemistry, and of course, on the wake of the preservation of our species. However, I would like to know your ideas, your thinking about the Bosch-Haber process. We have the 25% of a nutrient we have in our bodies is coming from that very brutal process, very far from green chemistry. And even perhaps 2 billion people in the world could not be existing with the food produced without the food produced by the Bosch-Haber.
Yes.
What you are thinking in that direction?
Food is a very difficult issue. Obviously, there are people starving all over the world, and there are famines. But if you were to integrate the food supply with the number of people, we have plenty of food. It's just not getting to the right people in the right way. And so when we say we need to grow more crops, I'm not buying that. What we need to do is innovate. And now, just 2 weeks ago, the World Economic Forum had this big thing on packaging and plastics, right? So we don't like packaging and plastics. Well, guess what? World hunger cannot be solved without moving food from one place to another. And the only way to do that safely is you better have it wrapped in a way that's going to keep bacteria and nasty stuff out of it. And so there's uncomfortable compromises that have to be discussed. But I would argue world hunger is not about growing food. It's about moving food from one place to another. And we're not doing that very well.
Hi, I enjoyed your presentation. I have a few questions, but I'll ask you the rest after. So I'm just going to ask you one now, for the sake of time. I would put what you're doing under the umbrella of translational research. And going back to what you said, that the currency of academia right now is publishing. How do you foresee that changing in the future? And basically in reference to kind of everyone's comment, and that it doesn't matter the research or the number of patents, it's the actual impact and if it turns into a product, if people use it. Yeah. But I feel like that will actually never translate to academia when the currency is publishing. So as someone who does this work and has a foot in academia, what is your thought on that?
All right. You might have pushed a little bit of a controversial button on me, but what the heck, I've already said some crazy things. Organizations, schools that want to have classes in innovation, I think we need to ask ourselves, I believe a student that shows up on day one at a university is amazingly innovative and creative, and our academic process takes it away from them. And so that they no longer have the self-confidence is because the worship of the precedent. They have all these scientists have gone before them, and a good scientist knows what people did before, and who are you to invent and do something? And every single student has the amazing capacity to come up with things that no one's ever thought of, but by their third year, they're convinced they don't. They still do, but they're convinced they don't. So we don't need to give them training and innovation. We get to be introspective and figure out how are we robbing them of that, and stop doing that. All right? And it's not an easy model because, again, the whole system is based on the currency of publication, which is intimately related to funding and grants. And so that grants and funding and counting of papers, my God, I actually would I reduce my respect for people if the number of publications exceed too much, because no human can be involved in that many papers. So if they're just a cog in a wheel where they have a lab cranking out papers, I'd love to give them a quiz and say, okay, what did you do here? And see if they actually know. And so it's not the number of papers. In fact, people should not have so many if they got too many. And so, but because the more papers, the better, and it's just so simplistic. And you can understand when, I've been on so many hiring committees where people love this person, they love this person. We're desperately looking for ways to quantify so as to decide who we're going to hire, who we're going to give the grant to, and we need numbers, we need numbers, we need numbers. And as Einstein and many other people said, that which is quantifiable is not necessarily that's worth quantifying, and that's not quantifiable is not necessarily the things that shouldn't be quantified. And so we have this bizarre relationship to the truly important things that represent who people are and what they're capable of doing don't fit very easily on an Excel spreadsheet. But if you're in an NSF study group granting grants, you need that Excel spreadsheet to sort because there's way too many people applying for that grant. And until we come up with some other way, and to be honest with you, I'm going to release my completely heretic solution. Stop giving faculty grants and give it to the students and let them pick the faculty member. At a university, the person with the most grants have all the students. Doesn't mean they're doing the best, most innovative, creative stuff. In fact, it might mean they're the most mainstream. Because if government is funding something, it's pretty mainstream. But if the student had the funding, the crazy person in the corner that's doing something really innovative and creative that can't for the life of them get a grant, that's the students will actually flock more to them than to the mainstream. So we need to change. Somewhere in time, the university started giving science students stipends for graduate school. And all that thought feels really cool. It turned us into employees and made us no longer students. We have no role, we have no voice in our education because we are employees, we're not students. Get the money in the students' hands, let them truly be students, and if there's a bad teacher, stop them from teaching. But right now, students have no power in science. And so there's a huge infrastructural thing that has to happen.
I agree.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.